A big welcome back to our listeners and viewers of the Responsible Edge podcast, brought to you by the Andrew Greenwash Charter. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Josh. Josh, thank you so much for giving up some of your time this Wednesday morning to join us for a show.
Absolute pleasure, Charlie. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to getting into it.
Good stuff, Josh. Good stuff. Now, I know that you've had, we met sometime last year. We were just trying to work out when it was. It feels like literally, times have changed significantly since you and I first met. And when we did first meet, you explained and introduced your career and the things that you've done, so far, in just such a sort of compelling and brilliant way. So I'm keen for us to kind of recreate that as much as we possibly can for our listeners and viewers. So start wherever you like, Josh. Okay. Some of our guests go back to childhood, others start a little bit later, but just give our listeners and viewers who aren't aware of you kind of a flavor of what you've done so far in your career.
Yeah, my childhood is nowhere near interesting enough to bore your listeners with. But I'll start at the beginning of my career. I think I'm a global head of social for HX now, a job that I'm really proud and privileged to have. But I think my path to getting there, I'd be totally lying if I said that I'd followed a carefully curated plan and it was a simple case of linear growth. It absolutely wasn't. I got into marketing kind of almost accidentally after I left university. My first gig was as a copywriter for a B2B agency. We did a lot of work with the built environment. Actually, we did some work with the UK Green Building Council that was really interesting. And, I'm probably shaming my own age here, but this is probably about 15 years ago. So this is at the point where social media felt quite new and quite scary to a lot of businesses. Back in the day where one of the main utilities of the platforms was creating content, hods and hods of content, all about creating lots of backlinks, which required blog writing and lots of tweeting. And so actually, as a relatively new and junior member of an organization, that's what I naturally gravitated to. And I think...
Josh, sorry to jump in and ask you this question, but just for the context, what did you study at university? What was your degree in?
I studied psychology, and when I tell people that, people say, "Oh, that must be really relevant for marketing," and I just let people have that assumption.
Brilliant. But so psychology degree and then copywriting for in a B2B context as your first role, and then during that role starting to kind of gravitate towards social media just quite naturally. What was it about sort of the opportunity within social that attracted you, do you think?
Honestly, I think fortune, without a doubt. So social at that time was really new and really scary. And a lot of the conversations that we had with businesses was about, what is this? Should we even be on social? Which sounds crazy to think businesses used to think like that, but they did 15 years ago. And honestly, Charlie, I was probably 10 years younger than anybody else in the office. And so it just naturally fell to me. I was lucky enough because I had an academic background that I was a competent copywriter. Not a great copywriter. I absolutely wouldn't profess to being that, but it felt I had the skills to do it. Nobody else was really keen to put their hand up. And so it naturally fell to me. And then once I started to work within social, I learned a lot about it. I started to gain confidence. And then actually where my career went for the next sort of 6 to 7 years was dotted around lots of different consultancies or agencies working with really interesting global brands. And really, the conversations were quite similar. Should we be on social? How do we use social? How relevant is it? Are our customers on there? How do we engage customers? What is social content? This is back in the day where trying to convince businesses that shooting content 16:9 doesn't necessarily engage everybody on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram and Twitter. And I was really lucky then. I worked for a global agency called We Are Social. They were the 3-time agency of the year in social media, which was amazing. Worked for some businesses that I'm really proud to have worked for, like Audi, like Skoda. Worked for Magnum, Canon photography, loads of businesses. It was a bit Mad Men style. I was quite young in London. Lots of late nights, lots of early mornings, lots of really interesting work that was compelling for a time. But I quite quickly got to a point where I got to the end of the week and I really didn't have the same sort of validation I had at the beginning of my career. And I think that was because actually the nature of consultancy meant that I was working across a lot of brands. I'd have a day where I'd have a meeting with brand A at the beginning of my day, meeting about brand B in the middle of the day, meeting about brand C and D and E at the end of the day. And I'd get to a Friday and I'd look back at what I'd achieved for the week. And I felt a real kind of lack of ownership, really. And I hate my type of personality type. I hate I hate the idea of being a corporate person that sits in meetings and says clever things, doesn't do anything. That kind of, if I look back at my career and people describe me that way, then I wouldn't be able to sleep at night, to be honest.
And Josh, just to pry into that, when you were doing your, and I'm going to just use your terms here, when you were having your Mad Men phase, and you were moving around from agency to agency, and obviously you got to the end of that period, and you had this reality, if you like, that you just described. But during that period, what was sort of motivating you to move from one agency and one consultancy to the next? Like, what was the sort of the driving factors, if you like, around your decisions to work in the areas that you did during that time?
I mean, there were two. One, I was motivated hugely by the work. I wanted to work with as many brands as I could. I wanted to be on the shoot for Audi when we drove an Audi R8 around London at 3 a.m. I wanted to see all the outputs. I wanted to be there for the whole 24 hours, even though I probably didn't need to be. I wanted to work on the new business pitch. I wanted to be in the meeting with the head of new business. And probably partly my age, young in the 20s, I was just discovering what the potential of the marketing career and social media career might look like. And so I was really driven and motivated to just try and experience as much as I could. Ultimately, it backfired, I think, if I'm being totally honest. But the second thing, and the very practical reality of working in consultancies, is that at the very beginning of your career, it's hard to move around. It's hard to move up. Once you're entrenched and you're in position and you're locked in and you're satisfying a client, it's quite hard to then say to your existing employer, actually, you know what, remove me from that role because I want this role, and find somebody else to come and do that role. And I felt a little bit locked in sometimes. And so my kind of natural inclination when I feel locked in and trapped is just to break out and do something else. And so, that phase of my career was with a lot of kind of 1.5 year, 2 year stints at different consultancies, which I absolutely loved. And I don't look back on with any regret, but I think it did ultimately lead to not burnout, but more a kind of lack of accountability, actually. And I approached the middle of my career thinking that really has to change. I have to do work that I can see myself in, I'm proud of, that represents something. And I kind of didn't get that, actually, by having that kind of mass exposure at the beginning of my career.
And we'll come on to talk about that kind of next phase, if you like, in a moment. I want to kick off with a question there, but you've described what you didn't get from that Mad Men phase of the career. What did you get from it?
Cool. I mean, the most dynamic work you could imagine. The thing with social is that it moves so fast. I remember new formats launching. We'd be in the room with Facebook while they're launching the formats, and we'd be like, right, well, let's go live. Let's be the first brand in the UK to do it. We launched the canvas ad for Facebook with Audi. We were the first automotive brand in the UK to do it. It was amazing, really compelling. It felt like it had great energy. Social changes every 3 months. One of the things I've learned through my career is writing long-term strategies in social are redundant, because you'll spend a month writing it, you'll spend a week selling it in, and by then the platforms have changed, your needs have changed. And so that was really reflected in that early era, that kind of dynamism and that kind of change and that constant opportunity. I thrived in, actually. I loved it. I still do. Absolutely still do. And that is part and parcel with a career in social. The platforms themselves necessitate that.
But it sounds to me like you know, in the context that you found yourself in, you really were at that kind of cutting edge and at the cold face, if you like, of innovation going on within the industry, which would have been thrilling and energizing in many ways. But then obviously, as you've described, you're then getting to this point of realizing that actually the sort of lack of single focus perhaps on a particular organization, a particular brand was becoming tiresome for you. Just, I'm putting words in your mouth, so you might turn around and say, no, you got that wrong. But
that's fair.
What happens next? So what we've hit the end of our Mad Men period. We put the whiskey in the cigs down, and what happens next?
I'm gonna have to start calling it the Mad Men era. My wife is never gonna let me live this down. So I was really lucky again, actually. Somebody who I'd worked with at We Are Social was heading up the digital team at Save the Children, the charity in the UK. And they were looking for someone to come in and run their UK team. And that was the right moment for me to try to do that. So this is not in a consultancy capacity. This is a brand side ownership capacity. So I came in and had to do all of the bits that were involved in everyday community management with fundraisers and fans through social, through to the editorial strategy, through to working and supporting in earned and paid social. And that was great. I think working for a charity really changed my outlook in a lot of ways. I think coming from a consultancy, especially largely corporate consultancies, the world is black and white. You know, there's profit and loss, there's good work and bad work, things you do and things you don't do. But then you work for a business like Save the Children, it's so complicated. There's policy and advocacy campaigning, there's lobbying the government at all times, there's event sponsorship with marathons, there's traditional fundraising, there's brand marketing and campaigns, so the everyday supporter services that are needed. And it's amazing, actually, working with those different departments. It's a really diverse collection of people. And that shocked me, actually. It was a really good learning curve in my life, because all of a sudden I was working with some kind of corporate people like me, who are traditional marketeers, through to the people that work for the policy and advocacy campaigns. These are hardcore policy advocates who have spent their life campaigning and lobbying for issues for no reason other than the fact that they truly believe in change. And that's really quite powerful and profound, actually. All the way through to working with the media team at Save, where, you know, there were some proper heavy hitters in the news and media team, people who had essentially given up careers at kind of the established tabloid newspapers to go and serve a greater purpose. And, you know, I'd never forget moments where people being briefed on content by the media team, they'd just been in a conflict zone. They'd had an armed escort to be able to interview and understand the situation and context in children's centres, to be able to bring that story to the UK. And then I had to objectively review whether or not that content is engaging. And I kind of just thought, my God, I am really not qualified to be even able to tell you whether this story is interesting or not. But actually, to be able to try and stay objective and remove myself from the emotion of that and review it in the cold heart of days, is this going to engage supporters? Is this story going to create new fundraising opportunities for the business? And if it's not, then unfortunately it needs to be nuanced or changed. And those conversations are really hard. And I think on a personal basis, actually, the kind of the life skills you learn in those types of environments and working and learning from people like that is absolutely incredible.
Did that, Josh? I mean, again, tell me if the language is just incorrect, but did that soften you in a sense? Did that give you that sort of capacity for sort of greater understanding and appreciation of perhaps different non-corporate perspectives? Is that what you're alluding to here?
I wouldn't use the word soften. I think it's more kind of forced empathy. We ran, not everything you do as a professional is successful. We ran campaigns at Save that weren't successful, and being in a campaign review meeting for a brand, a commercial brand like Skoda or Magnum, we lost money. That's a shame. We'll learn from it and we'll get better next time. And you can all square that with yourself. But, if you're a charity and you've lost money on a campaign, then, my God, that means something. That's less impact for children. That has a huge responsibility. And I think me understanding profit and loss in a new way, but also my colleagues' motivations in a different way. You know, I never worked with people who would kind of lobby me for stuff to go on social, and the reason they were lobbying me is because they were genuinely passionate about what the message was. You know, they thought it would do a greater good, and so I would say, oh, you know, this isn't really going to engage people on Instagram, and they would be like, well, I don't care. This is the right thing to do, right? And actually, when you extract yourself from that conversation, both perspectives are right, really. And so those skills of compromise and meeting in the middle, I don't think they're soft skills, right? I still use them. They're still absolutely essential, but I don't think I'd have learned them in the corporate environment. One of the most amazing things I did at Save was I partnered with the loyalty team, and one of the programs that we ran, really just to train ourselves as marketeers, was we went out and we met some of our supporters. And I remember thinking, that sounds scary. I did it. I went and met this lovely couple in Putney and had a cake and a cup of tea. And the reason we were doing was to try and learn about them. You know, why do you support Save the Children? You know, what are your motivations for doing so? What do you think we do well? What frustrates you about us? But also I spoke to them about more broadly, you know, their parents. I wasn't a parent at the time. You know, when you're on Instagram, what are you looking to get? You know, what are your fears? And my learning experience there was dramatic because it wasn't what I expected. I met these people who were actively fundraising for us. They're amazing people, right? They should feel really good about themselves. They should, because they do genuine good. But actually they were full of fear, full of anxiety, and full of trepidation about the world that their kids were going to experience through social, the fact that media narratives were becoming more negative. One of them literally said to me, I'm on Instagram because I'm addicted, but every time I go on there, I'm unhappy because I see stuff. You know, then this is peak Brexit. You know, this is real kind of polarization of media and social discourse was really heightening here, and it hasn't changed since then. But actually, I used that, and we took that away, and we wrote a strategy for social. Not a strategy, an editorial view, because you don't write strategies in social. And what I said to the business is, we're not doing negative stories anymore. We're not doing it because we can't proliferate these feelings for our supporters. If we have to serve a good in social and Instagram and Facebook, we have to give them something to feel good about. And so our entire editorial narrative changed overnight, and we would only publish positive associations stories, and we would only publish them through the eyes, ears, and perspectives of children, because that was our point of difference. And it was really successful, actually. Huge uplifts in engagement and our community growth across channels, and it all came from meeting supporters. And I think if I'm ever, you know, mentoring or talking to people in the industry, even though we work in social and, you know, digital can feel quite removed, really, people often behave quite differently on social to the way they do when they're walking down the street, but it doesn't mean it doesn't matter. You absolutely need to meet the people that you're talking to on social, understand them, because they'll help you learn.
Josh, it's an absolutely brilliant tip, insight, if you like, that anything anyone listening in can take away and apply themselves. We ourselves will certainly take that on. That was a brilliant suggestion. We've done the brilliant thing, as you can see, by the time of getting through only a fraction of what we need to, and it's already hit 20 minutes. So just take me forward from there, Josh. I mean, in fact, just before we move on to sort of what you did after Save, let me just ask you about whether or not moving into that role gave you everything that you were hoping it would, having left your, I'm not going to use your madman age, your agency life, did that degree of sort of personal satisfaction towards your work, was that realized through that move?
It did a bit, but I think if I'm honest, I felt jaded by working in a charity. I think because it's impactful, it's really hard. I think the content you see, the stories that you're running, you know, the impact on children in the UK but around the world, stuff that's tough to come to terms with. And I think over time, I did get the accountability that I wanted, but it didn't satisfy all the needs that I had. And actually, interestingly, my next move was back into the corporate world. And I think it was almost kind of trying to find an environment that I felt less, less kind of morally intense. And I moved, COVID hit And it felt like the world changed. It did, actually. The world did change overnight. And it has, a lot of those changes still exist. The discourse in social was irreparably changed through Me Too and Black Lives Matter, that launched through that kind of intense societal pressure moment that COVID and lockdown had. And I went and worked for Unilever. I was the social media lead for the beauty and personal care department. I'm not quite sure how I ended up in the beauty department, if I'm totally honest with you, but it was some sort of stroke of fortune and luck again. But we did some interesting work, actually. In COVID, we launched a reactive campaign so it's Sure deodorant in the UK. It's Rexona globally. They have a different brand name in lots of markets for some complicated reason. But we partnered with a load of personal trainers all around the world, deliberately not influencers. We chose personal trainers because they were out of work. Lockdown hits, and if you need to run a class of 10 people face to face and you can't do that anymore, that is a real big bloody problem, isn't it? So we partnered with a load of them around the world. We live streamed exercises, Pilates, you name it. We were live streaming it across some of our platforms, and we created a hashtag, Move More at Home workouts, essentially. The hashtag was viewed 1.5 billion times, which is madness. Probably the furthest reaching campaign I've worked on in my career. And I kind of enjoyed the intensity of COVID, kind of did some reactive work. And then as those kind of restrictions started to ease, I found less accountability in the job, if I'm honest. I found Unilever's an incredibly complicated business with loads of really clever, talented people. Sometimes that can be a bit of a pain, though. I just wanted to work in an environment where I could get stuff done quicker. I remember negotiating with legal teams about trying to get businesses to set up TikTok accounts for months and months and months. And I just thought, you know what, it's actually not fun. So I moved into my current role. So I currently work as the global head of social for HX. I mentioned at the beginning of the show, HX are an adventure travel company. So our elevator pitch is we try to connect guests with some of the hardest to reach places in the world. Those typically tend to be places that are best explored on a ship. So we have a dotted line into the cruise sector, but we are not a cruise business. We are not a 5,000 ship Royal Caribbean business. We have ships that carry 100 people, 200 people. We believe that travel can fundamentally change the way people see the world. That David Attenborough quote, which is the best way you can convince people to protect environments is to be in the environment. And so we feel there is a profound opportunity in connecting people with some of the regions that really need to be protected, as long as they travel in the right way. It's not just about getting somewhere, it's about the impact that you have on the regions that you visit, long-term and short-term. And so sustainability is a huge part of the business that we work in, and actually a huge part of our corporate communications. We have a public-facing ESG report. It launches every year. We are very transparent in that. We're transparent with our partners. One of the things that I often say to creators that we partner with is, I want you to challenge us. If you feel that we get stuff wrong, tell us. We believe that we're at the front of the industry, but that doesn't mean that we're proud. There's a whole lot of work to do in the travel sector, especially traveling to places like the Galapagos or Antarctica. There's incredible opportunity there, and there's a long road ahead of us, but we're proud to be pioneers.
And Josh, that was beautifully introduced. And I should say, for any of our listeners or viewers that want to check things out, we're obviously going to link to Josh's profile and link to HX's website and all the rest of it. Josh, I've got to ask you one more question about you before we talk about this week's article. When you look forward now and you think about the rest of your career, what would success look like?
Oh, man, I heard you ask this on other questions. And I remember thinking, I've got no idea. I think when we look, being completely honest with you, I became a father. I've got a 2.5-year-old running around my house now, and my life fundamentally changed the second he was born. And actually, one of the things that I didn't expect to happen, but definitely did, is my outlook professionally and my portfolio and my work changed. And so when I look back at my life, Charlie, I wouldn't look back at my career. I'd look back at how successful I was as a father. If I achieve that goal, if I can be present and I can not be someone that he looks back at and loathes, then my life is a success as far as I'm concerned. As far as work goes, I think success is about who talks about talks about it. I think I've talked about my career, I've quite grandiloquently there, but the truth is I had a load of luck and I had a series of mentors that were able to drag me through the dark days of my career. And they are absolutely why I am where I am now. And so I guess if I look back at my career and there were a few people who I was able to support and mentor, who probably are far cleverer than me and can achieve far more than the things that I've done, then I think actually that would make me more proud than anything else.
Two questions on that. Are you, I mean, you've got a lot on your plate. You've got a 2.5-year-old and the very senior role that you currently have, but do you mentor at the moment? Do you have any mentees?
No, I don't officially mentor, but I have a long network of people that I've worked with in my career, people that I've employed, people that still WhatsApp me asking for support, and I still meet for a coffee. I have always said to anybody who works in any of my teams, and it will always be true, I will put in as much time to your career as you put in. So if people are willing to put the elbow grease in, then so am I. And that sometimes means late night calls. It means supporting people with job interviews. It means asking, crowdsourcing whether or not this is the right brand to work for. I love those types of conversations, and I'm always available for any of the people that I've worked with. To the same extent, anyone that's listening to this would like some support in a social media career, then you've got my details. Reach out to me.
Well, Josh, that's gonna be a dangerous last word. You're gonna be it after this.
Reach out to me, or I'll send you to Charlie if I'm too busy.
Yeah. Suddenly drops off the cliff in terms of engagement. Brilliant stuff, Josh. As I say, I know we haven't been able to. We could do a whole show on you, and I would find it fascinating, and I'm sure our listeners and viewers would too. But let's move forward now to introduce the article, the timepiece. I think from February this year. Would you mind just providing a brief overview, brief summary of the piece, and perhaps just pick out for you whatever the most kind of interesting points were from it?
Yeah, so I mean, the article is a Time article, but it's about a piece of research or a research paper. The paper's called Pro Social Media. To anybody that's interested, I would make the recommendation that find the article and read it. Find the paper, sorry, not the article. The paper's about 45 pages long. Anyone that's been to university will kind of understand the structure of the report and the projections. It's a more rounded read, I would say. The article, in 1,000 words, it's quite hard to summarize 45 pages of recommendations. So that will be my top line.
Sorry, Josh, just before you jump into that, and apologies, we'll edit this out, but we will definitely be linking not only to the article, but to the original paper too in all of the materials. Sorry, Josh, do carry on.
So the first thing that strikes me about the paper is that it's got an incredible list of contributors. So it's from, I think it's originally sponsored from King's College and a couple of academics there, but contributors are a Taiwanese hacker turned political activist, a human rights lawyer, a Microsoft researcher. I've probably missed others. There's about 6 or 7 really interesting people who I got myself in a rabbit hole looking at each of their portfolios and careers. So I think that's the first thing that's really interesting actually about it. The idea of the article is that it positions social media, the existing social media framework and ecosystem, as fallible. So in the sense that most platforms operate in a similar way, in the sense that you have some type of news feed or explore feed that is essentially using an algorithm to curate content for you as the user, and that's personalized for you. The position of the paper, and I think it has credibility actually, is that that's potentially leading to false consensus. So if I'm a punter and I'm on a news feed and I'm reading content, I can see in quite a binary way how many likes or love engagements or perhaps views a piece of content has, but that doesn't necessarily tell me whether or not I should believe it, whether or not it is engaging and successful for the community of people that I care about, or indeed if it's something that I should argue about. There are some other kind of, I think, potentially dangerous generalizations from the article, that this false consensus is directly contributing to increased levels of loneliness and anxiety in society and life broader. I think that's quite a dangerous connection to make, if I'm totally...
Why, Josh? Why is that a dangerous connection?
Well, I think I've got a scientific background. And so the thing I always think when I'm reading research written up in media is the difference between correlation and causation. So the social media's impact to society, to younger people, to older people, absolutely has positives and negatives, but they're nuanced. I think when you look at generation, I grew up 25 years ago. And I remember people telling me that I was going to grow up and be a serial killer because I loved Grand Theft Auto. And I know my mum says that people said she wasn't going to be successful because she used to watch Top of the Pops too much. And if you go back into the 70s and the 80s, people said you listen to too much rock and roll, you're going to be in trouble. So I think there's always these zeitgeists that exist in popular discourse around younger people growing up, and it's hard. And I think social media is that for this generation. I think that's exacerbated by the fact that we have, if you look at our society, there are groups of media literate demographics. You've got younger people who are incredibly digitally literate, an older generation who are not very digitally literate generally, obviously. And then, people like me and you, Charlie, who are kind of sat in the middle, who kind of see it all happening. And I think the risk of making generalizations about the impact of social is dangerous. I think in certain contexts, does social exacerbate feelings of loneliness and anxiety? Is a contributing factor? 100% it can be. Social can also do a lot of great good. I worked for Save the Children, where we created fundraising tools in Facebook that's raised millions of pounds. That made a genuine difference. So that's social working really well. My wife has a mum network of people she connects with, and she crowdsources ideas, inspiration, and sometimes she's just having a bad day with my son, despite the fact that he's an angel. And social enables that in a way that would not have been enabled 30 years ago. So it's a nuanced debate, is what I would say about that.
And Josh, and slightly moving away from the article just for a moment, I want to come back to it and ask for your other reflections on it. But do you think that overall, like, social media gets a bad press in terms of the generic? Yeah,
I get not about. I guess look at the thing is, our world is, and social has partly created this, right? I 100% accept that. So we're in a world where headlines tend to be more important than stories. And so the headline social causes 15-year-olds to stay in their bedrooms and stream everything on Twitch. I understand how that's interesting. And there might be elements of that are true, right? Twitch does enable that. But the story, the societal impact of social is a lot more nuanced and complicated than that. And we need to have that conversation, actually. And what does frustrate me, actually, is that in popular media discourse, I think we lose a little bit of that nuance. You can make the same accusations about a lot of kind of popular areas of cultural discourse. What I would say is that if you look at my personal belief is that there are wider societal and cultural issues that cause increased feelings of anxiety, loneliness, and separation from the world. Social is probably a contributing factor to that. Is it the defining? Is it the defining causation? I'm not convinced it is.
I would totally agree with you on that. I think it's very easy to use social as the scapegoat, if you like, and not ask the more difficult questions about what's going on at a cultural and societal level. But that possibly is for another show. Josh, we get you up for that one. But just coming back to the article. You beautifully described there the whole notion or proposition, if you like, of essentially beginning to kind of label content better. Within these platforms. Just expand on that for our listeners. What does that look like? And did you agree that seemed like a good idea?
So I wouldn't argue with the problem statement. And I think one of the things that's quite useful. I mean, we're both very media literate, but some people aren't, and I think that's not a crime, right? The reason why we have a problem with algorithms is actually about human behavior. So negativity bias is real. And what that in really simple terms means is that we are more attracted to read negative stories about ourselves than we are about positive stories. That's unthinkable, but it's true, unfortunately. Our eyes go straight to the negative. We focus on that, I think, roughly 3 times more likely. And we're also more likely to look at sensational content than we are mundane, perhaps nuanced content. And so actually the problem that exists in algorithms is these are very clever systems that are essentially curating the information it thinks you want to see. Now, as a user, my psychology comes before my cognition. So unfortunately, negativity bias sits in me. I'm a Spurs fan. So when I see people shouting at Spurs, which happens very regularly, I'm attracted to it straight away. And my algorithm makes the mistake that I hate Tottenham. It could happen, right? And so these challenges around false consensus and the challenges with curating content through newsfeed and explore algorithms is really real. They're 100% right about that. The solution that is offered is interesting. So the solution is essentially to try to break down the kind of binary view of content and split it into two streams. So if you're on, this is a new social media platform that they're recommending should be created and should be used. And it essentially sits of bridging content and balancing content. Now, bridging content is essentially the stuff that you'll agree with. So this is people telling me that Tottenham are the best team in the world. And balancing content is deliberately contrarian content. And the idea of giving people the opportunity to see both of those is that it enables nuance. So actually, if I'm in my feed and I want to know about the debate that we just had about the societal impacts of social, I'm seeing your point of view that agrees with me, but then I'm also seeing Donald Trump's view that probably does disagree with everything that I said. And then actually, as a user, I can make a balanced judgment about whether or not there's genuine consensus. The other really important distinction is that they build groups based on communities. So if I'm looking at content, I would belong to a certain community. And then when I'm looking at the engagement of content, it would say this piece of content has been liked lots by people who live in London or people who agree with, I don't know, further education or whatever kind of community groups that are created. And that enables a more nuanced view of success. I think actually of all of the aspects of the paper, this is what I think is most interesting because it breaks down that really binary view that exists in most feeds that something is either good or it's bad. And the truth is, it's almost always never that case, never that. It's something in the middle.
And is it really? And Josh, you've explained that brilliantly. Is it just as simple as the platforms that we currently engage with want to make the experience as simple and as sort of direct as possible in terms of engaging with that sensational content, because that increases engagement, and that engagement is what ultimately can be monetized. Is that what it boils down to from a platform perspective?
Probably, yeah. I think the truth is when you look at the UI, the user interface of most social platforms, even the new ones, for like Be Real or Lemonade or something like that, they're actually incredibly simple structures. There is not much going on in there at all. And that's deliberate because they're easy to use. And it's easy to like something. If I was a new user to a platform and I needed to assign myself to a community and then assign myself to a notion of content and then decide how I'm going to engage in a piece of content and then try to make myself literate and understand how I interpret that success of other content, then that's a barrier. So I can absolutely understand why we've ended up in the world where we are. But the truth is the problem statement still exists. So we have platforms that are built to make the user experience really simple and effective. But by doing that, we've created an environment where it's hard to have nuanced debate.
So that begs the question. And by the way, I appreciate that we're having this conversation in a recorded public setting, but and feel free therefore to not answer it. But okay, how do we, and what did you take from the article about how realistic it is that we actually see this happen? Like if we've got platforms on one side that want to create these super easy, simple experiences that are ultimately driving a business model based upon, engagement, if you like, with that content versus the nuance that we would like to see in the way that people understand and appreciate the nature of what they're actually engaging with. How do we see that playing out? How does it work?
Well, I mean, I go back to it. The really easy thing to do is look at technology, and it's look at a platform. What's been written up in the paper is almost utopian, right? I think it would be amazing. I'd love to use it personally.
Yeah.
The truth is, the challenges and the limitations that I think exist in the platform are not about how it's built and not about how it would work. It's about behavior. The truth is there are two big components, two big caveats that would help the platform run. One is that advertisers wouldn't be able to advertise on a person by person basis. So they couldn't advertise at me, Josh Pizey. They would advertise at me, member of further education group, or whatever that would be. Advertising at a community level. And the truth is, I think that would build a more equitable experience. It would. But it would also reduce return on ad spend, being really brutal about it. And, we live in a commercially driven environment, and the brutal truth is that advertisers are not going to go to a platform that doesn't give them the best return on ad spend, because advertisers don't have limitless amounts of money. They're going to go to the platforms that enable them to target them most efficiently.
And on that point, because you brilliantly answered this, segueing into this question that I wanted to ask you, this might both be very poorly informed, this question, and ultimately might be going down a rabbit hole that we don't want to go down. So it's not got a lot going for it, in all honesty, even before I ask it. But Josh, is there a social platform out there that utilizes a non kind of advertising freemium model? Are there any platforms out there that you pay a subscription to actually be a member of the social platform, that you can then not be affected by the sort of advertisers dance, if you like, user play?
There are environments where advertisers don't roam. Blue Sky is probably a good example, actually.
Okay.
The challenge with that is they can operate in a microcosm, but the reality of running a platform with billions of users or millions of users is that it requires upkeep. It requires tech upkeep, if nothing else, right? But it also requires moderation. It's a really, really important point, and that requires investment to make sure that the environment is safe and secure for the people and users that have it. And so a certain amount of revenue is needed. It just is. And so I think advertising is a necessary evil in social. I honestly do. I don't see a way around it. There are some platforms that exist. Blue Sky exists. It's still relatively small, being honest. If Blue Sky overnight became the size of Twitter, they would have to radically rethink their model. That's the brutal truth. They would accept the same as well, I think.
And Josh, just let me excuse my absolute ignorance. I think I've signed up to Blue Sky, and I don't believe there's any sort of charge associated with it. Do you ever see a situation in which users would be prepared, if they remove the advertising element to their experience on social, to pay for a subscription?
Not in a mass view, no. Why does the internet exist? People hack on the internet. They want free stuff. Look, I can get around 1 million paywalls using ChatGPT. Most of the clever people who are listening to this already do, right? So a platform that's going to genuinely move the social needle will have to have a huge number of users. And so a subscription model is never going to be relevant there. There probably is going to be subscription models, but they will be environments with really focused and nuanced conversation. So, for instance, I might sign up to a Tottenham Hotspur platform because I don't want to listen to Sky Sports talk about Tottenham. I want really nuanced intellectual discussion about who we're signing, all that kind of rubbish stuff that most people will care about. But actually, because I'm super, super interested, I might pay a couple of quid. But that will never blow up outside of that bubble, I don't think.
So in that sense, and by the way, I love the continuing references to Tottenham Hotspur. It's brilliant. I'm gonna have to ask you what you think of Ange and whether or not he's going to hold on to his job in the summer. But we'll come back to that. Segueing out of that for a second. So okay, so in that sense, we are stuck with advertisers. This is just how it is going to be. And what am I taking from what you've seen in the article, that yes, it is a utopian view, but there are certainly principles within it and within the paper that you would hope to see adopted, perhaps, or influence perhaps the development?
I would challenge your statement a little bit. I think saying we're stuck, we're stuck with advertisers is slightly pejorative. In the same way that if you watch Channel 4, you have adverts. No one argues that that's a bad thing. Adverts don't need to be evil. Sometimes adverts can be really interesting and really clever and really cool. John Lewis launching a Christmas ad in November breaks the internet every year in a positive way, I think. So sometimes it's not necessarily about the advertising vehicle, but it's the method, right? And maybe, the way advertisers are targeting is not nice. And maybe there's ways that can be more nuanced in platforms. There's definitely room for that conversation. I think that model will always need to exist, and that's led by behavior, because people aren't going to pay for a subscription. I wouldn't pay for a subscription to go on Instagram. I don't love it that much. I don't think anybody really does. I think ultimately what I would say is we're talking about platforms, but the truth is it's all driven by behavior. I think what's really interesting, what I would love to take from I'd love everyone to read the article. I really would. I think it's really, whether you think it's crazy and will never happen, or whether you think it's what we should set up tomorrow, we should have that conversation. And I think the bit that I take from it that's really interesting is around removing that binary good versus bad when we review and evaluate the success of content. I think that's really important. I think, and when I see that in my feed right now, I find it really hard. I'm big into, I listen to loads of politics podcasts, and I'm big into it. Most people are through necessity now, right? The rest is politics. It's a huge kind of thing that's blown up over the course of the last couple of years. And you see question time clips that come out and they're on Facebook or they're on Instagram, and I look at it and it's been viewed 1 million times or it's been viewed 15,000 times. And I'm like, okay, that's a lot, but who's viewing that? Is it all the people that I don't care? Is it all the people that are never going to vote the same way as me? All the people that I would never be able to have a nuanced conversation with? Or is it all of the people that I really care about? Is it all of the thought leaders and influencers who can actually make change, who are, who could swing one way or another in terms of their viewpoint? And I think what will drive that in platform is the behavioral need for it. So right now, I don't think there's enough of a groundswell of view that people want platforms to make it less binary. That's the honest truth. I think like versus not like works for the vast majority of people that use social platforms. I was just going to say that I think these platforms follow behavior. People assume that that social platforms are manufacturing the way that we interpret the world. And to an extent, sometimes that's true. But broadly speaking, right, if everybody on Facebook behaved a certain way, I can tell you it would take them 48 hours to change their platform to be sympathetic towards that. If everybody stopped watching video in Instagram tomorrow, video would go really quickly. So it follows behavior. So I think that's why I'd love people to read the article, see what you think. I certainly would love more nuanced content evaluation in my feeds, but that might just be me.
And Josh, just on that point, and just for clarity, is it, and the reason you're encouraging our listeners and viewers to go and check out the article, which I totally concur with, is because the reason why we don't have that groundswell of behavior, sort of lobbying mandate going on, if you like, from the user base of social media, is that people don't realize what the possibilities could be in terms of their experiences on social. Is that why things like this article, things like this research piece are so important?
Yeah, definitely. Actually, it's a really good point. I think social and digital literacy is something that should be taught. Maybe it's taught in schools. I don't know. Should be taught to everybody. It's so important for us to be able to critically analyze and understand the information that we see in social and in digital more broadly, actually, especially in an AI built environment. It is so terrifyingly easy to manufacture total rubbish, and I would know. So I think, I don't know what the solution is to that. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know how we move to a point where you've got these kind of big literacy divides across our society, and we have conflict there, and moving that to a point where we can have a nuanced conversation about what we want social to do for us as a society. What role do we want it to serve? I'm just, I work in social, but I'm only one user. I'm one kind of punter in the feed. I think more work like this is the first time I've really seen a radical idea like this written up in a cogent way, if I'm being totally honest. I'm close to trends, I'm close to the platforms themselves directly, and I haven't heard this type of nuanced debate before. So I think the wider stuff like this can go, the better. If I'm being, like I said to you earlier, Charlie, being totally brutal, there are some fundamental issues with the proposition around advertising and around subscription based that I think would prevent it becoming a new platform build. But the solution to create more nuanced engagement around feeds is actually very achievable. That could be done within platform, actually. It would just need users to necessitate it.
Well, Josh, I love always concluding an episode with a bit of a call to arms and a bit of a call to action, if you
We're
like.
going to
And
solve social, Charlie. Let's do it.
well, this is going to be the starting point, isn't it? Brilliant. Now, Josh, as you can see, obliterated timings as expected. Let's conclude now with the magic wand question. I'm fascinated to see what you're going to do with this, especially in light of that last point, perhaps. But if I was to hand you a magic wand, you could change one thing about the commercial world this instant. What would that one thing be?
So I've thought a lot about this, actually. I'm going to cheat the question. So sorry. I'm going to have a micro and a macro, if that's okay.
You can have two. You don't go for it.
Something about my industry that I think really isn't talked about enough is the need for mental health support for people that work in social. Quite often, businesses chuck the social media manager in a corner of the office, don't talk to them unless something bad happens or unless someone's moaning on Instagram or something. I think the truth is, it is incredibly difficult to be on the front line of a brand. Every brand will give somebody a reason to complain on social. That is natural, right? That discourse is natural. It's not a bad thing necessarily, but you have to remember that it's the same people who are picking that up. And it's really challenging over a long period of time, especially for some businesses that have absolutely massive engagement. That's a lot of negativity to be handling, managing, responding to, conversing around on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And visible, tangible support needs to be provided for people in those roles. And something I feel really passionate about. And there's not enough done. And what I mean by that is not a phone line that somebody can ring if they're having a bad day. It just feels banal and not effective. And I'm talking about people who are in the building, who are present and are there to support. They're not necessarily affiliated to the business, but they're actually there to ensure that the people who are on the end of these conversations with customers or with fans are in a great frame of mind and are relaxed and sanguine about their role in the business. And that means ultimately they'll be more effective in their job. We'll have better conversations with customers, but also you'll be able to scaffold, mentor, and retain talent better. So that's something I really care about. I wish I could change that overnight. That's really hard, to be honest. And then the more macro, what would I do? I wish we could change stock market valuations. Very relevant now that we're in Trump world. But I wish I wish ESG and sustainability performance was directly linked to stock valuation. So I would love those valuations to be inflated or retracted based on the ambition of sustainability targets. And then actually, I'd love to be able to hold businesses to account. When they meet or when they miss sustainability targets, they should be less valuable as a business. And I feel like this, but it's easy for me to say that. I'm just a small guy from South London. But if a business isn't diverse in its boardroom, if a business is hiding its gender pay gap, I don't want to invest in them. And I don't think they should be. And I would love that to change because I think overnight you see radical change at a boardroom level. And that would be terrifying for a lot of people, but also ultimately would probably build a more equitable workspace for everyone.
And it comes back to the beginning of the conversation where we were touching upon transparency and all things associated. Josh, you're going to get 2 here's back to back for both of those suggestions because they were both absolutely spot on. I think your idea around mental health support for, and again, I'm going to broaden it, people working within marketing, sales and comms roles. I mean, that is, you are on the front line. You are dealing with a lot of engagements that can be traumatic at times and difficult to appreciate and to understand. And I think that's a sensational suggestion. Again, what you've done is you've come up with a series of sort of calls to arms at the end of the show, which is brilliant. Josh, I've absolutely loved this episode. It's been brilliant having you on. Thank you so much for giving up your time and joining us this morning. I really hope you have as well, and we might be able to snaffle you for another one in the future. But thank you for today.
Absolute pleasure, Charlie. I will be listening with interest in the future. Thank you.
And that's all for today's episode of The Responsible Edge. A big, big thank you to Josh Pizey, strategist, writer, and advocate for better digital design, for joining me for today's show. In this episode, we unpack the bold proposal behind pro-social media, exploring how a fundamental redesign of social platforms could shift us from polarization to participation, and how communication itself can be retooled to foster healthier, more coherent communities. As a reminder, this episode was brought to you by the Anti-Greenwash Charter, championing responsible sustainability communications. Visit antigreenwashcharter.com to learn more. I'm Charlie Martin. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. See you next time.